Well, good evening, everyone. Michael Soothing here. It's almost 4th of July. I think I'll be posting this maybe the eve before, Today's the day before. So it's not really evening. Anyway, since it's 4th of July weekend, I wanted to talk a little bit about how 4th of July came about. The Declaration of Independence. Have you ever wanted to do a Declaration of Independence? I have. I think I've done one a couple times. Anyway, it looks like this. I have one here. The Declaration. Congress. The Continental Congress of 1776 signed this thing. See all the signatures on the bottom? Here's kind of a fancier version that shows portraits painted of various scenes and things. It's got George Washington, the Declaration of Independence, that shows some of the events in picture form surrounding it. There's George Washington at the top. He was not a signatory, though, to the Declaration. It was congressional representatives from the 13 colonies that signed it, although one abstained. That would be New York, because they're a little slow there in New York. No offense to any of you New Yorkers. Any place that would get Andrew Cuomo, well, never mind. So, I wanted to read the Declaration of Independence so we could remember what 4th of July is about. Remember the colonies who had left Britain for the New World. They were getting a little upset about taxation without representation, so they threw a big party called the Boston Tea Party. You can read about it if you didn't learn in school. Anyway, what was happening was they didn't really get a vote on what was going on in Great Britain. Nonetheless, Great Britain was taxing the heck out of them. So it's like, you're going to tax me, but I don't get to vote on the laws by which you tax me. So they didn't like that so much. That and some other reasons. So they all got together. Thomas Jefferson drafted the first draft of the Declaration of Independence. He's one of the guys that's in the Black Hills there in South Dakota at Mount Rushmore, where we're not allowed to set off fireworks this year, even though there was a really good display last year. But if any place would be appropriate for doing firework display, that would be it on 4th of July. But no, so I'll refrain from any political commentary on that subject. But I'm going to read to you the Declaration of Independence. This, of course, eventually led to the Revolutionary War, to break away from Great Britain, also known as the UK. But it was just, the Kingdom of Britain at the time. So we share a very strong legacy with the British of a commonality. As they say, two countries separated by a common language. I love British accents. but there can be a little bit hard for the American ear to understand sometimes, just a little bit. Some of the words are different. You know, here we call the storage area behind the back seat of a car, we call it the trunk. In Great Britain, it's called the boot. You know, a lot of stuff like that. Anyway, 345 years ago, after Thomas Jefferson penned the Declaration, the Continental Congress convened. They made some changes to it, and then this is what they came up with. In Congress, July 4, 1776, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which has connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. What that whole paragraph means is, we're going to tell King George why we don't want to be part of the United Kingdom anymore. So then it goes on. People think this is the first sentence, but it's the paragraph. But it's really the second, this part. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Endowed by who? The Creator? Oh, they're not endowed by natural law. They're not endowed by the government. They're endowed by the Creator with those rights. So what they're saying is, an oppressive government really doesn't have the right to throw tons of restrictions on you. That's not the natural course of events. Not that our government would ever restrict us in any way. But anyway, sorry about that. We are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive to those ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute a new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to effect their safety and happiness. I wonder if any governing bodies have made decisions lately that affect people's safety. Do you know that the murder rate in my home state of Oregon, in the city of Portland, is up 500% in 1 year? And of course, the safety of the citizenry in all the cities in the U.S. is, the crime rate is skyrocketing every place. So apparently we no longer have a government, in many cases at the city levels, county levels, and state levels, that are securing the safety of the governed. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. That sentence means people get complacent as governments get more and more oppressive, and they tend not to rebel until they reach a breaking point. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty, to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. You thought the Declaration of Independence was shorter than this, but that's only the first page of 1, 2, 3 and a half. Or is it 4 and a half? 3 and a half typed pages. But see, they wrote small. It was written by hand, not typed, by typesetting, and you can see how tiny the writing is, but very neat. Look, there's the famous John Hancock signature at the top there. I believe he's the one who drafted the final version, or at least the first signatory. It was signed by a bunch of guys. I'm not going to read them all. 2 future presidents signed it. That would be Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. And the oldest guy that signed it was this dude named Ben Franklin. Hopefully you know something about him. He was a genius of his day. Philosopher, businessman, inventor, artist, you name it, politician, you name it, he was doing it. All right, let's go on with the Declaration and see what else they say. This is, of course, before the Bill of Rights and the Constitution was drafted. So back to the facts they're going to submit to the world as to why they're going to rebel. He's talking about the king here. They are. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operation till his assent shall be obtained, and when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records, for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. I don't think you could say manly firmness now, but that's what they said then. He has refused for a long time, after such dissolutions, to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. I seriously doubt that there is a single college student in existence who knows or understands the Declaration of Independence. But anyway, let's go on. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. This was the beginnings of the separation of powers, The Supreme Court, the judiciary versus the Congress versus the presidency, He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and for the amount and payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. Sounds pretty bad, all these things that good old King George did. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has affected to render the military independent of and superior to civil power. In other words, the British Army could kind of do whatever they wanted, including come into town and take everything if they so desired. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us, in many cases, of the benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses. I'm going to have to count this list of the things they're citing as facts by which they are rebelling, or what would you call it? The facts that they're citing for which they want to break free to form new government. For abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing absolute rule into these colonies, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our government. for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. The British had already, by 1775, sent, I think, something like 30,000 troops to be an occupying force in the colonies, because they knew this was coming, or there were rumblings of discontent over all these things. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. There's a Mel Gibson movie that kind of goes into some of what happened during this era. So you might check that out. What's it called? You guys know. I can't remember names and titles, You know I have that problem. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny. The foreign mercenaries were mostly Hassan, German troops that they paid, to come fight on behalf of the English, which he already began with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages, and totally unworthy of the head of a civilized nation. I don't think King George probably appreciated this list very much when he first read it. And he was warned that England probably couldn't prevail in a war with the colonies, but the British had the biggest naval force on Earth at the time, most powerful, and they had a pretty powerful presence throughout the world, the British Empire. But they faced a lot of risks by going to war with the colonies. The place was far away. How are they going to provision all of the troops? And the colonies had several million people, so they could raise a pretty big army. And they ran the risk of the French joining in with the colonies, the sworn enemy at the time of the Brits. And the French did eventually join and help in the Revolutionary War, which lasted 7 years, by the way. But anyway, going on with the colonies' complaints against King George. He has constrained our fellow citizens, taken captive on the high seas, to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or instead to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections among us, and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. This would be a rather controversial paragraph today, but of course remember, you can't judge what happened in 1776 by today's standards, because the world was a very barbarous place back then. Slavery existed on the American continents, for example, long before the Dutch and the British brought it to the southern colonies, because it existed amongst a number of the Indian tribes in the north and in the south. You know the history of say, the Aztecs and so forth. But this was a worldwide problem back then. True civilization and freedoms had not spread. Well, many countries still have slavery today, to this day. North Korea, for example, northern provinces of China, and certain other countries I won't mention, because it's, I don't want to get people worked up. On the 4th of July, we should be able to celebrate, shoot fireworks, and have barbecues. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which must define a tyrant is now unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our immigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. But they too have been deaf to the voice of justice and of consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation, and hold them as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war. In peace, friends. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress assembled, appeal to the Supreme Judge of the world for the restitude, I should say, of our intentions. We do in the name and authority of the good people of these colonies solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And then it goes on and has signatures of all the guys that signed. Most of them you won't recognize the names. I read you a couple of them. But unless you are a specialist in... Oh, here's one you'll know. From Massachusetts. Samuel Adams, from whom the beer company is named. Okay, you'll know that one. Boston Lager, right? John Adams is there. I have traced my lineage back to the Virginia colony. we had a guy that was on my grandmother's side. She was obsessed with genealogy. So when I was a kid, I went with them on a trip back to the southern states where she researched for hours in all kinds of libraries back there to trace back the genealogy. We had a guy that was part of the first Congress there in the Virginia colony. But anyway, this is what the 4th of July is about, is those rebellious people that came to America and said, enough of all of this. You're not treating us right, King George. So you're being mean to us. So we're going to break away. Besides, we're far away from you. So what are you going to do about it? Well, it took 7 years of bloody fighting. But eventually, the colonies prevailed with the help of, the French and some others. But it was not an easy task for them. You know, they had to do a lot of guerrilla warfare and such in order to win. And that allowed the states to go forward in this great experiment of democracy, which has had its ups and downs along the way. My voice is going. You're gonna get a bit of whisper video. Yeah. So I think that's gonna have to do it for today. Hopefully we don't have to debate politics on this issue. It's, you know, all countries and peoples and cultures have origins that go way back, and before that there were others who conquered others, and before that others who conquered others, on and on like that, you know, without end, going back through human history. So this country's done pretty well overall, all things considered, in spite of some of its errors. Yeah. Hopefully we can pull together again as a people at some point in the future and build on the good rather than obsessing over the bad and going at each other's throats. That's not very productive. Like I said about the crime in the cities, you need a civil society in order to have a good society that's democratic. So we need to get back to that. People should be able to share their opinions with each other, you know, without a verbal assault or a physical one, right? Anyway, folks, I hope you have a nice 4th of July. We're going to have fireworks on the Oregon coast and enjoy ourselves. Celebrate our independence, even though we might feel a little constrained these days. But yeah, take care, everyone. Don't ASMR and drive. Bye-bye.